And so that ordering surprised me, both expressing being down there, but also asking being ahead of doing. And the thing I immediately wondered as an economist is, as the agentic capabilities both develop and are more widely diffused, so people know how to use them, maybe that would start to change. And I want to keep that classification that we have consistent so I can look at those doing and asking messages over time.
Welcome to the Retailgentic Podcast, where we explore the intersection of retail, e-commerce, and AI agents, which we call Retailgentic. Our mission is simple. We are shining a bright light on the new agentic AI shopping megatrend, which will disrupt the trillion-dollar digital retail market. The stakes are high. Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Perplexity, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Anthropic are all fighting to be the consumer AI shopping agent winner. There are going to be some tough decisions for online brands and retailers to make. What happens to checkouts? How should payments work? Should you continue to invest in retail media networks? What does the world look like when over half of your traffic is not from humans, but from AI agents? These existential questions are the tip of the iceberg. On this podcast, we're talking to industry experts, analysts, and influencers to get answers to these questions, identify trends, and best practices. This is Retailgentic, your podcast partner in navigating our AI shopping agent future. And now here's your host, Scot Wingo.
Welcome to Retailgentic. In this episode, we have a very special treat for you. In mid-September of 2025, OpenAI released a working paper in collaboration with the National Bureau of Economic Research. Like many of you, I read that paper from start to finish, and it analyzed millions of conversations that happened on ChatGPT. It was excellent, but many of us in the agentic commerce world had a bunch of questions. I thought, who could we get on the show to talk about this paper? And as fate would have it, the OpenAI author is Ronnie Chatterji. He is a professor here locally at Duke University that started back in 2006 and left in late 2024 to be OpenAI's chief economist. It also turns out I know him pretty well because I go over there to Duke, which is in Durham, North Carolina. I'm in Raleigh, where NC State is. And then in the Triangle, we're fortunate to have 3 Tier 1 universities. The third is University of Chapel Hill in Chapel Hill. Thus the name, the Triangle, the 3 cities. So I go over there and talk to the students in both the business program, undergrad and grad, master's and exec program very frequently about startups, entrepreneurship, startup financing. There's even a professor there that goes really deep into marketplaces and e-commerce. And I probably go over there once a quarter, or if not more frequently. So it's a lot of fun, and I find that it's just really interesting talking to these professors because they're out there doing very interesting research. So I figured, I'm sure he's a big shot now, and he's hanging out with presidents and all kinds of stuff of, foreign dignitaries. The last thing he's going to want to do is come on a podcast about the intersection of retail and agentic commerce. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I shot him an email, and he responded very quickly. And today, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome to the humble Retailgentic Podcast, Ronnie Chatterji, OpenAI's chief economist. Welcome to Retailgentic. We have a very exciting guest today, someone I've known for a long time. He when I knew him, he was a professor at Duke, and now he is at OpenAI. Ronnie, welcome to Retailgentic.
Scott, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you, and I've learned a lot from your amazing business career and all the entrepreneurial ventures you've been involved in.
Yeah, so imagine my surprise. I was reading this awesome paper, which is How People Use ChatGPT, and I'm looking and I'm like, Duke, Aaron Chatterji, wait a minute, I know him. So I reached out to you and I was like, man, I love this paper. I sleep with it under my pillow, not to be too fanboy on it, but I do appreciate you guys putting out data. It's really fascinating to see how people are using this new experience. Yeah, but before we jump into the paper, tell me a little bit. I know your background, but give the audience a little bit of background and specifically, how did a Duke professor end up at OpenAI, and what are you doing there?
Well, thanks. And I'm looking forward to talking about the paper and why we wrote it and kind of the impact that it's having. So I've been at Duke since 2006. This was my first job out of grad school. I did my PhD out in the Bay Area, actually during the time of another big boom in Silicon Valley. And so when I was at Berkeley, I just learned a ton about entrepreneurship and innovation, talked to a lot of successful entrepreneurs, and I realized I really wanted to devote my career to understand the economic impact of entrepreneurship and innovation. And so when I came to Duke, that was obviously a really hot topic, both for research and teaching. And I found myself in an environment where I could do really cutting edge research, but also interact with folks like you, Scott, and others in our area in a really exciting entrepreneurial ecosystem. So just a perfect fit for me. Did that research, wrote a bunch of papers. And sometimes when you're writing those papers for an academic audience, you're not sure that anyone's reading them. But to your point about sort of the role of data in informing us in society and our decisions and just the usefulness to practitioners, I always felt like the research I did, if I could summarize it for an op-ed, let's say in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, I was probably writing a worthwhile paper. If you can't do that, then maybe you should think about your research question or kind of the work you're doing, because if it's hard to translate, it's not going to have the impact that maybe that you want it to. And so as I wrote those papers and found some success as an academic, I started to get more interested in how to apply that in the real world. So I did a bunch of things, serving in government, of course, and worked with a lot of companies in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship. And then, when I came back from serving in the federal government, where I was running the CHIPS and Science Act implementation, which was this really interesting investment program in semiconductors, OpenAI reached out around that. And I think it actually was the intersection that I've had between academic work in economics on innovation and entrepreneurship, really sort of deep interaction with business in terms of how businesses are implementing technology, and understanding sort of the policy environment around critical technologies like chips and AI. And putting that all together, it just made it the right time and the right place for OpenAI to name its first chief economist. And an honor to be in that role, and also really proud that Duke University has supported me all these years as well in these endeavors. So really proud to be a member of both those families.
So your official title is chief economist?
Yeah,
Economist?
yeah, chief economist. Yeah, it's
Nice. Very
yeah,
cool.
it's good. It's good. I'm the first one, so I guess they can give you that title. But mostly what it's meant is I have two main roles. One is to conduct cutting edge research on the impact of AI on the economy. And man, for a data nerd like me, we have this amazing access to seeing how technology is changing the world through the use of ChatGPT, through Sora, through Atlas, the browser, through all these different mechanisms. So it's been really interesting to get to see some of that data and be able to, write papers around those. And, of course, protecting privacy and making sure we're using the data in the right way, but, to tell the world the information that they need to know about how AI is affecting the economy. And the second piece is doing a lot of speaking and engagement around the world. It's interesting to me, Scott, like this technology in particular, and AI, generative AI, has just sparked so much interest around the world. So I feel like whether it's in Delhi or Abu Dhabi or Brasilia or Sydney, I've been to like 10 countries in the last 10 months. You just see such an interesting conversation around AI in all those places and more. And it's quite different across those places, which I thought was pretty interesting. So that's kind of how it's been shaping up so far and what I've been learning.
I imagine your chips knowledge helps. This may be a huge leap, but I'm sure OpenAI cares a lot about chips. So yeah, I like the e-commerce oriented news, but it's like feathered in with all the cool chip stuff you guys are doing. So,
yeah,
so I'm sure you're busy on that side too.
Yeah, hardware and software. I mean, that's one thing I'd say is, guys, like, what's interesting about AI is both those sort of the innovation, obviously, in software, but also at hardware, and kind of how they have to be complementary. And that's going to be a really important part of, the companies and the countries, frankly, that are winning in AI and other deep technologies.
I have a million questions on that, but we're going to keep it narrow for today.
Sure.
So let's talk about the paper. Like, what was, my understanding is this is not really a series. You may do more, but this was kind of a first of its kind. What was the impetus? Obviously, as a chief economist and a former professor, publish or perish is always on your mind. I don't know if that's in your purview here or not, but you probably always have this in the back of your head. I got to be publishing something. So I'm probably that.
No, it's right. No, Scott, so interesting. I think all these things have mattered. So you're right. Like when you come into a new role from a different environment, usually people's advice is something like, okay, this is going to be really different. Throw everything out the window and swim in a new kind of water, right? And learn the ways. And there's a lot to that. Like, I haven't worked in a place exactly like OpenAI. And so it was going to it was required that I would have to adjust to things. But actually, it's a pretty research-driven organization, and research is the origin of all the advancements. If you think about why people are at OpenAI, it's because of the research in large language models, the advent of the transformer, the scaling laws, things that have taken this to where you see it is today. And so me coming in as a person who said, look, I want to do economic research wasn't that foreign of a concept as it might be for the typical professor coming into a typical organization. So that was number one, a lot of encouragement. Number two is the economics portfolio was something that people were really curious about. So in addition to being a researcher, I'm also very demand driven. So if people say, hey, look, how is this affecting the future of work? How is it going to affect my company? I start to get these questions all the time, Scott. It's like, I often joke, economists aren't usually the most popular person at a cocktail party or something like that. But when it comes to this, people now ask me all the time, what do you think? What do you think about AI in the economy? So I saw that there was a lot of interest in answering those questions. And finally, I just think it's really important for the world to have the best forecasts and indicators that they can about how AI is affecting the economy, because it'll be a very major change, I think, in terms of how we organize work, how we organize our leisure time and plan those things, and how we think about the way the economy works. And I don't know if that is going to be faster or slower than people's timelines, depends on your listeners, but it is going to happen. And I wanted to make sure that the research I was doing was really relevant to that. So writing a paper about how people use ChatGPT seemed like a great first step.
And then tell us a little bit about the methodology and where the data comes from. You're obviously in the belly of the beast, so you have access to all the data. So it must have been hard to pick to pick the piece you want to go with.
Yeah, I think the two requirements here are like, how do we protect user privacy? How do we do this in a way where we can be really transparent about all the methods? So that's another reason we wrote a paper, and we intend to submit it for peer review so people can look at that. And we published with the National Bureau of Economic Research as a working paper so people could look at the appendices and the robustness checks and all those kinds of things. There's obviously more work to do. We can always do better, but that's why we took that approach versus like a typical report. First, we have to find a way to think about, what are you going to focus on? What do people want to know? There's lots of different kinds of data one could look at when it comes to AI adoption. We chose usage by consumers. So when you and I are using ChatGPT on the free plan or the plus plan or the pro plan, think of us as consumers who have messages that we're sending to ChatGPT, and understanding sort of what those messages are at a high level, not actually reading them, is a really important indicator of how consumers are using this new technology. Just for reference purposes, you can think about enterprise data. You can think about sort of Codex, our coding product. You can think about Sora, lots of different angles. Even within enterprise, there's chat, but there's also the API, which people like you, Scott, probably build on more so than even the enterprise chat side, which I know is important in a lot of other kinds of firms. So we focus on the consumer side, and that's going to be important later when I tell you about.
So that's all out. Yep.
Right. That's
no API, no enterprise.
That's exactly right. Not in this paper. And I think this is where it helped being a researcher. I thought, it'd be great to do everything all at once, but it's all those data sets have different restrictions associated with them, how you might want to use them, how you might want to interpret the data from Codex, let's say, versus chat. And so I really felt like it was important to sort of focus on something where people could understand what it was, and also we could get deeper in terms of thinking about these things. The second thing is, we're not going to read the messages, right? That's, so our angle was to try to create a technique to try to classify the messages, rather than read them. And of course, to protect privacy, but also just for efficiency purposes, right? You can't read all those messages, nor would you be able to or want to. So we constructed a method to use classifiers, and that's a lot of work that's been done inside OpenAI that we built on. And we tried to classify these messages into different categories. So we didn't need to read them. We could basically understand, is this a message where someone's asking for something? Is it a message where someone's trying to do something, complete a task, or are they just expressing their opinion or their belief on something? So that was kind of how we thought about it to start. And we sampled over basically the last year, 2024 and 2025 are the 2 years that went in our sample for most of the paper. And we said, let's take, 1 million or so messages from this, classify them, and try to understand how people are using ChatGPT. So that's how it all started.
So the surface area is like prompts, right? Is that kind of like the atomic?
That's the right way to think.
Classified prompts. So you're not looking. I'll call them classified prompts because I wanted to be really specific. And I understand you're not looking at any. It's all totally anonymized. You're not looking at the prompts, but I'm trying to understand the surface area. So that's the surface area.
Yeah, de-identified. I'd say the surface area is de-identified conversations. So it was start with the prompt, but then conversations. Exactly.
Okay, so that was one of my questions because I got a little confused because it seemed like prompts and part of it, and then so if I'm like, the topic of what we're doing is buying products, and so if I'm having a conversation about fixing drywall, and some of them can actually be. Will you actually pick that conversation apart and multi-categorize it? Because I may be DIY kind of
This
category, and
is
then I may go into I want to buy a hammer or a drywall tool.
we'll sample. So it's not, you're right that like if it's a kind of a multi-layered conversation where sometimes we're asking and sometimes we're doing, we're not necessarily going to pick that up at every conversation level. And that's something we can
Okay.
do actually in future work. But for now, kind of sampling from conversations is the way we did it. And I mean,
Okay.
to your point though, as you think about the future of how people interact with these tools, the conversations, might go from asking to doing pretty quickly to say, well, how would I do this? And I might say, why don't you do it? ChatGPT. And that is interesting and something we've been thinking a lot about. But for now, limiting just sampling would kind of prevent us from doing some of the things you're talking about.
Yeah, in my world, we're seeing data, survey data, not your data, but it's showing that the things you're offering to the consumer in retail, where they're usually doing research, find, and buy, you're compressing that down very quickly. Where, and as they trust you, because you guys have earned this high trust bar, again, survey data, you haven't said that, that's me saying it. People are kind of like, oh, it's recommending this. So they're going through that very quickly. So it will be interesting to see that pulled apart. That's my one ask for the next paper.
Oh, I'm taking suggestions because we're going to keep writing on this. It's so interesting, Scott, because I actually I bought a pair of jeans. Actually, I'm wearing them right now, my favorite pair of jeans using ChatGPT, and I don't shop that often for jeans and something I don't really enjoy. And so my wife has always encouraged me to go trying a bunch of things, and I really enjoy. I don't really want to do that usually, right?
Yeah.
But of course, like you need to get jeans that fit and you're comfortable with. So, I basically talked to ChatGPT about, hey, here's the kind of brands I like, that's worked for me in the past. Here's the sizing on those brands. I kind of do some of this off the top of my head. And I said, I want something different. I don't want to buy the same brand that I had before. I want to buy something that is related. And I thought, hey, maybe, I'm a guy now who works with a bunch of people who are 25. So I said, like, give me something that not everybody has so I can kind of, feel like I'm keeping up with the young people, right? And it recommended a lot of great brands. And I just went and investigated them and ended up buying the pair of jeans. And it worked out really well, And so I feel like I can see
that's how Ronnie ended up with skinny jeans.
That's how I ended up with skinny jeans. But I feel like, to me, that shopping experience is much more enjoyable than going to the same store, asking the same questions, looking at the same brands, trying to be in a hurry. And I did it, in a waiting room, something for one of the kids while I was just waiting for them. And so I feel like, wow, like that made my life easier. I don't know if I'm the typical shopper, but I saw some of the gleams of what you're talking about in commerce through that.
What surprised you the most as you were looking at this data? As our chief economist, what did you say? Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting.
Two things. One is there's been a lot of talk about how people are using ChatGPT to express themselves and ask for advice about personal relationships. Actually, that's not the largest category. The largest category is just asking for information the way you would with a web search to say, hey, what's the capital of North Carolina? That's like the kind of question. And if you think about those use cases, people want a specific answer often when they're asking. The second one was doing, which is, hey, can you do this task for me? And I think what surprised me is I tend to use some of the agentic capabilities pretty deeply in a lot of my work. But I think for most people, asking is still higher than doing in terms of percentage of messages. So if you rank our use cases, asking is highest, doing is a close second, and then expressing is a distant third, I'd say. And so that ordering surprised me, both expressing being down there, but also asking being ahead of doing. And the thing I immediately wondered as an economist is, as the agentic capabilities both develop and are more widely diffused, so people know how to use them, maybe that would start to change. And I want to keep that classification that we have consistent so I can look at those doing and asking messages over time.
Well, the topic of our podcast is really specifically in the product world. And it's good you've already used ChatGPT. You've seen the little product cards. And yeah. I'm sure you know about this instant checkout thing that has us all excited in our world. The other thing is, this is when I talk about this report, everyone's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, the one with the colors and the columns. And they're like, oh yeah, I saw that. So this kind of went viral in my world because a lot of people, it's a good chart and it's very colorful. So did that surprise you? That this chart was very popular? Okay. Because you have a lot of other cool charts that I'm sure economically you were more excited about.
This chart basically, in terms of the breakdown and the colors, we spent a lot of time thinking about. And I have to credit my co-authors, and I want to call out Kevin Wadman, Carl Shan, Chris Ong in particular for sort of thinking about this kind of chart. And it didn't surprise me. I think we knew that some charts were going to be more interesting in terms of let's say LinkedIn or people who are practitioners. We knew other charts would be more interesting to economists. And so for me, this chart, I kind of knew could be interesting. I didn't realize how viral it would go, but I knew that this one would be popular. And to be honest, sometimes economists, and if I didn't have some great data scientists working with me on this paper, we don't think enough about making charts that are readable and digestible and punchy. At least I think I don't do enough of that in my research. So having people who think about that as part of their job, and that's why I'm calling out Carl, Kevin, and Chris, really, really important. So yeah, this is good.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, Scott, like what do you think about this chart made people excited, or why do you think it was interesting to them?
I think it was interesting because the columns, so you've got multimedia, other and unknown. It's usually, so that's interesting. That's second, because usually people would put that at the end. So I don't know if that means anything. And then practical guidance, seeking information, self-expression. And now you've said it, I kind of understand what you're going for. So I thought that was interesting.
I think practical guidance, seeking information, really important sort of use cases. The other one that comes up a lot is writing, and that's like something I want to emphasize too. So in the purple, right? Sorry, it's narrow on my chart right now, but the writing, which is good, but the writing is really interesting, both in the consumer applications, but especially when you look into other applications, let's say enterprise, writing is really, really important. And for some people, they say, oh, well, that's sort of boring. Like, I'm not interested in writing. That sounds very simple. But writing is actually the foundation of most of the jobs that people are doing in an office, let's say, like what traditionally called white collar work. And so you think about the ability of ChatGPT to help people write, that's really, really important. The second thing I'll say is a lot of people, and I'm a dad of 3, so the first thing I thought was, gosh, like, I hope that people aren't just outsourcing like this writing process to ChatGPT. And what it turns out is 2/3 of this is actually people submitting things that, are already written and asking for edits or summaries. And there are challenges with that too. But one thing I started to think about is, like, for people who don't speak English as a first language or might not be the best writers, it allows them to refine their writing and polish it and make it better, or maybe make it more cogent or punchy and get to their point across. I thought this is a big deal. And I think as we refine writing with AI tools, and we got to do it in the right way. And I talk a lot about this with educators, and I'm asking a lot of questions of educators. I think it has tremendous potential. And it seems like a pedestrian category compared to all the other things people think about, but I think it's really, really important.
And then the one that caught my attention the most is in this red column, which is column number 4 at the bottom. And it's a tiny, tiny slice, which made me a little sad, but we'll talk about that, is purchasable products at a very tiny 2.1%. So that was you shopping for your jeans.
That's probably me shopping.
If that was in our data set.
That's exactly right if we do. But I think, to me, Scott, what I've learned from this research, and it might be useful for folks who are listening who are super interested in retail, a lot of it's about awareness, right? I'll give you an example. Deep research is one of these parts of ChatGPT, a tool you can use that, in the previous versions of ChatGPT, it was sort of something you had to click on a drop-down menu and you could sort of like queue it up. And deep research was really useful for me. What it does is it goes out and really does like a more sort of serious and rigorous investigation of, let's say, the prior literature in a particular field, like monetary policy, and comes back with a really well-organized summary, if that's what you're asking for. And as someone who's an academic who wants to get smart on a couple different topics, that is really, really valuable. And I go to people all the time. I do these trainings around the country and around the world where I'll try to help people use ChatGPT. I don't know if I'm the best person, but I know a little bit about it. And I'll say, hey, deep research can really help you. And they say, oh, what's that? And they're really experienced users, but they don't always know the features. And I think when it comes to like thinking about purchasable products, I'm sure there's lots of things like that. As awareness increases, as people understand the use cases, I expect that to change. So that's something I'll be watching, but I think it's super interesting.
As an entrepreneur, I'm a eternal optimist, and I was thinking, I don't really understand the categorization thing. I bet it's something in there, and you've given me hope. And so if someone started, I do think most people start with these kind of like, hey, I'm thinking about getting some jeans, and that may show up, especially like the whole home improvement category. You don't start with like, I need a compression drill, unless you're like an expert. You start like, something's gone horribly wrong in my driveway, and you end up getting a compression drill. The way your sampling works, that could get caught up and put into more of the education bucket. So,
that's correct. That's correct. And I think you're right. Someone might be asking a question, but it's actually sort of about intent to purchase downstream. And our sampling methodology would undercount that, which is super interesting to explore. I'll tell you one more thing. It's obvious to you, but just for folks who listening who might also be interested in this. I mean, the video and the voice ability changes the game here too, because sometimes, particularly like, let's say a tool around the house, like, I don't know what tool I need to buy. You might be better than me at this, Scott, like knowing the right tool. But if I can show ChatGPT a picture of here's the thing I'm trying to fix, they might tell me this is actually what tool you're looking for, which then gives me the cue to buy that thing. I would have been completely lost without it. And that's very helpful. And I find that to be sort of, in terms of, awareness to intent to purchase to like the sale, a really, really important aspect there.
Yeah, I use voice. I've used both those together. It's like I had some weird growth on a wall and I took a picture and it's like, that's black mold. Do this immediately. And it took me to buying products very quickly, which
That's
I
interesting.
did instantly.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
It got me freaked out. It was kind of
Yeah.
urgent about it. I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
And this, I mean,
ChatGPT is urgent.
yeah, this is amazing, right? I think that we end up taking this stuff for granted. Now I use the video all the time, but if I would have told you, I don't know, pick a time period, 18 months ago, 12 months ago, that you could basically talk to ChatGPT as you were looking at the wall, figure out what it is, and then buy something to deal with it, like you would have told me that was science fiction, right? It's pretty cool. So I'm
Yeah.
interested in that.
The sense of wonder, I still have it. I feel like I'm in a Star Trek episode. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
amazing. I love it. I imagine you didn't really do demographics, so there's no way to kind of see what the younger audience is because you're not tying it to user sessions. So there was no way to look at that.
We do in a data clean room, we were able to match to some user characteristics. And so as we continue to release more research, we'll be able to tell you, which users are more likely to do one or the other. We did use those demographics to try to understand what people were doing that was work related, let's say, compared to their job. Compared to non-work related. So we do have some limited demographics in there that we were able to match. And that's one of the innovations that we had in this paper that no one else had done before. A lot of the data on usage has been really interesting. I learned a lot from all the other people doing this. They haven't had demographics. And so we were able to say, for example, that users with typically masculine names versus users with typically female names or feminine names, that gap between those two kinds of users had closed almost entirely by the time we did our study. When ChatGPT first came out, the platform was dominated by users with typically masculine names, a big gender gap at the beginning, inferred by name. Of course, we don't exactly know people's genders. We have to infer it by name. Really important to say that. Yeah. But over time, we're the first ones to report this, that gender gap closed. And so really, really interesting to put some of those demographics in there and can do a lot more with the age variables as well, I'm sure.
Yeah. So one thing I've had a lot of discussion on LinkedIn with people. Number one, people love to argue over what agentic commerce is. So I won't tie you up in that one.
You can keep me out of that one. I won't get down that road.
I'll keep you out of that one. But then, there's survey data that shows in Q1, like maybe 33% of the folks kind of said, I've used, a Gen AI for shopping or researching products. And now it's starting to show up as high as 75%. And I just kind of wonder, so the 2.1 and the 75 don't line up. So it sounds like two things could be the cause. Number one, you kind of pointed out with deep research, maybe people just aren't as aware of the shopping thing, and it's kind of a lagging. This data is a bit of a lagging indicator of where behavior is going to go. Yeah. And then the second one would be my theory that there's a little sampling thing going on in there, that it's hard to, depending on where you're sampling the conversation, if you sample the top of it, it's going to feel way more like information gathering than buying. And but as people get more familiar with the abilities, and a lot of this is new, so the product cards that pop up, and then certainly we're only 45 days out from the instant checkout announcement. People even knowing, and not everyone's live yet, so the people being able to do this in faster. So are those two theories that kind of jive with your economics?
I think those are two good theories. And the one I'll add, it's not going to explain the whole discrepancy, but I think it's possibly relevant here, which is, we classified the percentage of messages, right? You could also think the surveys that you're citing are at the user level, right? So it could be a user sending lots of messages, but they do more messages asking questions like, what's the capital of North Carolina, than they do about shopping. And if that's true, that could create spread. Now, the spread is larger than probably would be explained by that. But that, I think, if I'm thinking about the numbers right, is another way to think about this as percentage of messages versus users.
Do you guys plan to put out more? Is this going to be a series, or is it enough work that's hard to kind of
both? I mean, my team will tell you both. Now, I love this kind of work because, Scott, at the end of the day, you nailed it at the beginning. As someone who's a researcher, I think the most valuable thing I can do inside the organization is do research on the impact of AI on the economy. And while some of that research, obviously is really useful internally, I think that OpenAI's mission to benefit all humanity, it requires that as much of this data that I can share and research that I can share, I put out there. And of course, I never can do it all. I won't be perfect. There'll be some things I won't be able to do that with, but continuing to write research papers that people read and learn from, like this one, is definitely a goal. And you'll see much more from us going forward. The other part of your question is also, yes, it's a lot of work. And I can see why it's something that's hard to stay committed to, because, in a lot of organizations, they do do it once, maybe they don't want to do it again because they don't think it's worth it. For me, I want to keep doing it, but as a manager, allocating the resources to get it done, data science, econ resources, but of course also comms, legal, all the other people we have to rely on who help us make these projects work, it taxes them as well. So I just try to think about that from a leadership perspective and make sure that we can organize ourselves in a way to do the good work. And people like you and others who've run companies and groups and things like that know that's a big part of it as well.
Well, I know you're super busy. You're probably off to jet somewhere to go solve, answer people's economic questions about what's going on. Really appreciate you coming on and helping us understand what's going on here. It's super helpful. Would love more data that you guys put out. Thanks for doing this. From just anecdotally from a little corner of the world, we appreciate it. And this kind of data is amazing and very helpful for us to understand what's going on.
Well, Scott, thank you. And I just say your work, as we talked about, is an inspiration to me, and it's made a huge impact on our community. So it's an honor to be with you.
Thanks. And if folks want to, are you active? Do you kind of like have just LinkedIn is the best place?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to reach me. I'm trying on all mediums, but really LinkedIn is the one that works the best for me right now in terms of putting my messages out there and trying to get people to see the data. So we'll keep posting stuff about the research findings. So if you can follow me on LinkedIn, that'd be great.
Awesome. We got to get Sam to have you on one of those little podcasts where they sit there and talk about stuff. That'd be fun.
Yep, exactly.
Thanks, Ronnie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
Follow, rate, and share to stay up to date with Retailgentic, your guide to the future of AI shopping agents.